There are some people who claim that a good strategy post-Brexit is for the UK to become a tax haven. There are a lot of consequences of a hard Brexit, which we discuss in other videos. There's a link in the description. However, one of the consequences of leaving the EU is that the UK would be free to set whatever taxes and tariffs it wants to. This would allow the UK to become a tax haven. Just to clarify, the UK doesn't need to leave the EU to become a tax haven. Ireland is widely regarded as a tax haven, and yes, is still a member of the EU. However, the freedoms the UK could receive post-Brexit would easily allow the UK to become a tax haven. So before we discuss if the UK could or even should become a tax haven, let's briefly go over what a tax haven is. In the simplest terms, a tax haven is any country which offers your businesses and citizens a lower rate of tax than you do. This attracts people and organisations to move to other countries to avoid your higher rate of tax. There are a variety of techniques which companies and individuals use to avoid tax, but we discussed that at length in our video about tax havens, so if you want to find out more details about how tax havens work, then you can check out our video. Again, there's a link in the description. So firstly, could the UK become a tax haven after Brexit? Absolutely it could. If the UK were to lower its tax rates for businesses and individuals, it could very simply become a tax haven in an attempt to attract wealth to the UK. However, there are tests put in place to prevent tax havens. Generally, countries don't like their businesses and citizens paying taxes in another country to avoid tax. Governments obviously rely on taxes to pay for the numerous costs associated with running a nation. As such, there are restrictions put on tax havens to try and discourage them. The EU has a test called the Fair Tax Test. This is a test it performs on all non-EU nations, which post-Brexit would include the UK. The EU uses the results of these tests to create a blacklist of tax havens. The EU says in its definition of fair tax rules that countries should not offer preferential tax measures or arrangements that allow companies to move profits to avoid tax. There's even been suggestions that the UK's current tax policy may put it at risk of being on the blacklist, even before any potential attempts to become a tax haven by lowering tax rates even further. The claim that Britain is already a tax haven is far from dubious. The UK already has a number of crown dependencies and overseas territories which are viewed by many as tax havens. British offshore jurisdictions include the Cayman Islands and Jersey, both of which have a 0% corporate tax rate. EU officials have already said they plan to clamp down on these British territories that have previously been omitted from the blacklist. An EU official reportedly said, "The UK has always protected them in the past. That's not going to happen in the future. We will go after them." So should the UK take these threats seriously, or is it a better strategy to become a fully fledged tax haven after Brexit? Becoming a tax haven is certainly something which has been threatened a number of times during the negotiation process. There are some who point to countries like Liechtenstein as a model of how the UK could be a successful tax haven after Brexit. Those in favour of these plans highlight how high Liechtenstein's GDP per capita is. In fact, at $139,100 per capita, it's the highest GDP per capita in the world, way ahead of the UK, which sits in 40th place with $43,600 per capita. When you look at this alongside their corporate tax rate of 12.5% and income tax at 3%, it's easy to see that Liechtenstein, being a low-tax nation, has brought in a lot of revenue and have been a major reason behind the country's success. The problem with this argument is that a lot of tax havens are very small countries. Liechtenstein is home to less than 38,000 people, compared to the UK's population of over 65 million. The government of Liechtenstein simply doesn't need to bring in as much money to cover education, health, and the other costs of their citizens. If the UK were to become a tax haven, it would have to service the entire earth multiple times over to raise enough money to cover the UK's budget in the same way Liechtenstein does. The Guardian reports that over 70% of the economically active population of Liechtenstein are foreigners, meaning that these foreigners can cover Liechtenstein's costs. For a ratio that high, the UK would need an astronomical number of foreigners to move their finances to the UK in order to cover the UK population's needs, as there are 1,725 times more people in the UK than in Liechtenstein, meaning costs are thousands of times higher. The model may work for small nations who have comparatively small tax bills, but it's just not feasible for the UK to become a tax haven in the same way as countries like Liechtenstein. The issue is also wider than just economic. It's about how becoming a tax haven would affect the fabric of our society. The existing British tax havens which exist around the world already put the UK in a difficult position. In another Guardian report, Italian anti-mafia journalist Roberto Savino said that Britain's existing offshore financial model makes it the most corrupt place on earth. By tax havens' very design, they attract a level of corruption and criminal activity. The purpose of a tax haven is to accept potentially dirty money, simply turning a blind eye. Britain already faces this challenge. Recent attempts to stop dodgy financial dealings in the UK have been limited by the claim that if the UK does clamp down, money and jobs will leave to other countries more willing to look away. If the UK were to continue down this path, the issue would become even greater. Reuters reported that back in 2014, the Big Four financial firms placed adverts in Hong Kong newspapers complaining about democracy protests happening at the time. They claimed that these protests were making Hong Kong look like a less reliable place to invest. Attempts like this to maintain investments and keep people trading with tax havens can severely affect a nation and limit its democracy. Offering the services of a fully fledged tax haven could really open up the UK to becoming more corrupt and less democratic. Further than that, it's not the kind of investment the UK needs most. The UK needs the kind of investments which create jobs, invest in local economies, and empower communities. To get the right kind of investments, businesses need educated workers, facilities, and infrastructure. All of these things need tax money to provide. Slashing taxes to get the kind of investment which is here today and gone tomorrow and scared by any signs of political disruption doesn't give the UK the kind of economy it deserves. To find out more about tax havens, check out our other video, and to keep up to date with all the news and politics information, subscribe to TLDR News on YouTube.